My name is Mitesh Madaan, and today I will be giving a presentation on the topic of threshold signature. We will be discussing about what is signature and what is specific data signature and why we need it. And then we will discuss about the threshold signature. Why is it very special and what is the and why is it very special and what are the so special about it? And then at last we will be discussing about another signature protocol and then compare these two. So starting first let's understand why do we need signature in this world in the first place. Suppose you are a manufacturer or a manager or a manufacturing company and you want to deliver a particular product to your customer. So now the delivery man comes to take the product from you. Comes to the this red guy comes to you to get the product, and he demands that you put a your signature on that product. Now, the reason it demands that the signature is a proof of entitlement or authorization of any object, virtual or physical. The signature will give an proof of the ownership or authenticate the ownership of that particular object, and it also used when the objects are transferred between any two particular entities. So when you deposit a check in your bank, you sign it to authenticate that you are the owner of the bank account mentioned in it, and you are transferring the money from your bank account to somewhere else through this check. So for the document or any contract, you sign on the document to authenticate your ownership of that document or your consent to it. So now coming to the digital signature, why we need it is that because the unlike the physical items that can be stored in a locker or something, digital assets or digital virtual assets are stored on a computer or a hard disk or something. So now uh, hard disk or something, they are very much digital assets are prone to the attacks or the theft. The computer can be hacked by some external body, or itself a computer gets stolen or you lost the access to a computer. So in that case you will lose access to the information. So data signature is used to protect this information or data using the concept of cryptography. The signature can be used like any other signature, like the physical signature you use to verify the document, you sign the document. Just like that, digital signatures are used to authenticate your ownership of the digital asset during the transactions. Now, until now, whatever we have discussed, has been a context of you or I being the owner of that object. So, what this means that the particular object or an entity has been owned by a single individual. The single person is the owner of that particular entity or an object. So that comes under the category of of the single signature, where a particular object or entity is tied to an account or a user, and that account and a user is held by a single person like me. So I will have a key pair that is a public key and a private key. The public key will be used by anyone in the world and is is available for anyone to see, and it will be used for the verification purposes. But about the private key, that is it is secret and it is only known to me. I will use the private key to sign the digital assets to authenticate them and generate the signatures, and then the signatures can be verified using my public key by anyone in this network. So in this way, I have provided a security to my digital assets and also provided a way to verify them that I am the actual owner of that particular entity. So there are the two big major problems in this particular protocol. The first one is the lost access to the information. So there have been a lot. Consider the news. They were saying that a 3.7 million bitcoins are probably gone forever. These are lost bitcoin. They are never coming back. The problem is that I have the private key and only I can access that particular information. Obviously, I won't be sharing it with anyone. Otherwise, it won't be private. But thing is that if I lost the private key or accidentally someone gets access to that, so that can control my information. Or even if I lost it, so even if I can't access it and no other information or no other person can access that information. So even if I choose to safeguard the key myself by writing it on a notepad and keeping it in my bedside drawer, or if I put it in a wallet that can be hacked by some outer person, I will be losing access to my. If I lost the key, I will be lose access to the information. So in this world, the trusting a single entity is is a suspicious and very dangerous. So we need to have a better trust system. the system. Also, there is a bigger problem discussing here. So there inherently there are some of the objects in this world which can't be owned by a single entity. So like consider a house. You are the only This is you and you are the only owner of that house. So you will use your key to open that house and you can do it very with no problem. But suppose you are not the only owner of that house. You are live in that house with your parents or your roommates and you all three have the specific separate keys to that house. So now in the real world, this all the keys will be saved duplicates of each other, but in crypto world, each person will having their own keys, and then your group of people can come together to create a composite key which will be used to open that house. So understanding that, suppose there are three members in your family, and the protocol requires that at least two members should be present at any time to open the house. So you will say that out of the three keys, at least two keys should be present to open that house. So this way, no single person can enter into the house without the presence of any other with him or her. So this house is just an example or representation of anything in this object which requires the multiple ownership. So to solve this problem, the multi-party signatures were introduced, where the owning to the trust issues on the single entity holding and requirement of multi-party ownership, a new branch of cryptography emerged as multi-party signature. The multi-party signature relies on the multi-party computation protocol, that is an algorithm which runs on the group of the participants and then generates the signature and on the with the cooperation of everyone involved in that. So that whatever the entity or object you want to hold to, that object has been held by the n group of n participants. It is a joint ownership, and whenever the time requires that we do some transaction or some operation on an object, a subset of users must come together to cooperate for the verification purposes. The important thing is that all everyone should not be present. Everyone need not present at the time of the verification. That will be very much ineffective. But a subset of the users, at least some particular users, more than one should be present to authenticate that process. This reduces the risk of the object getting lost because no single person has the ownership of that object. Even if I, as a part of the group, lose my key, I can rely on the other members of the group to get the access back to the object. And also, it provides us the trust people believe because in real life situations, we it is reasonable to assume that a majority of the people in this world are honest and trustworthy. Only a small fraction of the people can be dishonest or we can say malicious notes that like we say in the digital world. So any multi-party signature protocol that you make, it relies on the principle of T out of n participants, where out of n participants, at least T plus one must come together for a transaction. So any particular adversary which comes and corrupts up can corrupt up to the T participants, even that cannot perform any operation on that object. So going on, we will be discussing about the threshold signature and why is it so unique. Threshold signature is a type of the multi-party signature, but the special property of it is that it has a single public key. This is the most important property that makes it so unique and special about it. And about the distributed private key, we will be discussing it later. Just that each individual has its own private key, but the singleness of the public key is the most important factor. So now each shared entity is tied to a single public key and associated with the private keys of all n participants. Any group of participants or any subsets that come together to generate the signature have to use their private keys and sign the object or an entity. The using their private keys of private keys and their combination the com- combined private signature is generated, which is then used to sign the particular transaction. The property is that the threshold signature is a contract between the participants It is not fixed. It can virtually support any multi-party approval and the threshold models that regulators or marketers may demand. It could be 2 out of 3, 3 out of 4, or 4 out of 8, or any multi-party approval or the threshold model that we require. A subset of participants must come together to construct a private key, which is then used for the transaction. So now about this is a particular we will understanding why we have been talking about the distributed private keys. So consider this case. Since everyone must come together to complete the process of the verification, the composite private key that is created during the transaction is gets exposed to all the members involved. So it is important that all the funds held by that key should be moved to a new address before the next transaction. Why it is important that if this is not done, then any person that gets away with the key, gets away with the combination private key was generated, can meddle with it. So to prevent that, and that this protocol was established. But the problem is that this is a very expensive process, because moving the data, all the funds or the data that is tied to it is a very inefficient process, and also needless to say, it requires a lot of coordination of the people. So so uh, we switch to the special system called distributed key system, where the public key is unique, but the private key is the composite private key is not exposed to any member of the group. Instead, the private key is distributed into very large in n shares for n participants. Each participant has its own share of the private key. The share is a secret to that participant, is known to anyone else. No, is not known to anyone else, and each participant holds a secret share of the private key. And anytime any subset of the participants come together for the transaction, their secret shares are jointly combined to construct the private key. Each participant has a secret share, and threshold signature uses the secret share to construct the private key during the transaction. The secret shares or the composite private key are never exposed to the members of the group. Of course, you will know your secret share, but you never know the secret share of other participants, and you can never know the private key that was constructed during the transaction. All of the other parts are hidden, and then public key can be used to verify that signature as earlier one. So public key is unique, and private key is distributed among the participants in a distributed key system. So this gives rise to the very important property why threshold signature is so popular and so great at handling the blockchain transactions. So reason is that the threshold signature has a single public key, and this is the property that makes it so special and unique. Is that the verification of a threshold signature is has the same computation and the same complexity as verification of a single signature single signature. It requires no extra computation than the single signature verification. So that makes it so special. And above and that, the robustness is that even if the t malicious parties they deviate from the protocol process, they cannot prevent it from generating this valid signature. And proactiveness in another major property of the threshold signature, where the MPC algorithm told that the MPC algorithm runs and generates the shares of the private key. Now MPC algorithm periodically refreshes the secret shares allotted to each of the participants. So even if there is an adversary system which gets hold to the secret share or subset of the participants, it can, by the time it successfully attacks the system, the secret shares of all the participants will be refreshed, and the his attack will fail. So this way, then added layer of security is provided. So it has the threshold signature has three major benefits: the single public key, distributed private keys, and periodically refreshment of the secret shares of the key. Coming on to this is another multi-party signature protocol that is called the multi-signature protocol. So I will explain the difference in this diagram. So in this diagram, the left-hand side shows the scenario of the threshold signature, where each participant has its secret share of the private key. This yellow key is the private key, and the combined private key has been generated for the transaction, while the public key is entitled to the object that is being shared, and it is fixed. In the multi-signature protocol, each participant not only has a private key but also the public key. This private key is the complete private key of that particular participant. It is not share of anyone. And then each participant has its own public private key pair, just like as a single person has in the blockchain technology world. And these anytime any subset of participants come together, they generate a recombinant private public key pair. In this session, we will understand the key differences between the threshold signature and the multi-signature, since both are the two different types of the multi-party signature protocol. The first one is the custom infrastructure. Threshold signature appear as a single signature in the blockchain technology, and we can make assume that the every blockchain or the digital asset protocol can support the single signature verification procedure. So thus, no special arrangement or a writing of a smart contract is needed for multi-party verification in case of the threshold signature. But in the case of multi-signature, it records the signature of all the participants involved on the block on the transaction itself, which increases the length of the signature, which increases linearly with the increase in number of the participants, takes up more space on the block of the transaction, thus leading to the large extra expense in the transaction, large delays in processing, as many miners prefer to process or validate single signature and threshold signature over multi-signature transactions. And it also opens up and provides more opportunity for the vulnerabilities and the errors. Now, a case where the multi-signature wins is because the threshold signature, each public and the corresponding private key shares are permanently belong to the shared entity participant group. But in the multi-signature, each participant has its own public private key, and that participant can use that public private key pair, which is owned by it, to participate in the numerous distinct groups simultaneously with the same pair. But for the threshold signature, for the person to participate in two groups, he will have two different share private key shares for each one for each group. So multi-signature provides more flexibility to the participant, but the threshold signature provides more security to the participant. About the security, we will see in this slide is that we about the entry and exit of the new participants. Here, any information related to the participants involved and the multi-party approval, the threshold model that was used is hidden behind the composite public-private key pair used in the threshold signature. Anonymity to the group of owners regarding their ownership. But multi-signature records the signature of each participant on the blockchain directly, which allows anyone to gain information about the participants and the approval method used subsequently. Each time private. So you can see that the threshold signature provides more anonymity and anonymity to the group of the owners. And about the security, each time the private key gets changed in the multi-signature protocol, an on-chain transaction needs to be executed on the top of the original transaction being done, and this results in an increased transaction fees, complexity, and that makes the proactive security impractical, and this makes the entry and exit of any of a participant a cumbersome and a very expensive operation. But in the case of threshold signature, it has according to mathematics, for a single private key, for the same private key, we can generate an infinite number of the private key share combinations. Using this property, the wallets can proactively refresh the private shares of the participants on a recurring, on demand, or a combination basis without changing the private key actually of the shared entity. This provides more security to the participants involved. Thus, this special feature of the threshold signature makes it so special and great to use security protocol. The threshold signature provides more security and anonymity to the users involved, and thus is a better protocol to use on a blockchain uh, for for the joint ownership of the entities.